After writing and revising my script, the first thing that I did was to get a printed and spiral-bound copy made. This isn't really a necessary step, since really you can just read it on your phone, but I wanted to have a nice professional-looking physical copy of my first professional script. Then, once that was done, I got right to work on the movie. There was still a ton of work to do even before starting principal photography. For one thing, I wanted to make the miniature even fancier and a better match for the house I was filming in. The house belonged to my sister, and so I didn't have to worry about rent and permits. And I knew that I could go there and film whenever I wanted, so that was a huge advantage. But I still wasn't ready to do that since I had a lot of pre-production work to do. The most major addition I made to the miniature house was to add a garage and an attic, since the original model didn't include those features, and for this movie I was going to need them. Also, my sister had done some redecorating since we filmed Crowforest 2, so I needed to do the same redecorating in the miniature, as well as make some of the existing decorations better. After all, this was for a movie that I hoped would become a hit in a wider market, and not just collect dust on YouTube like my previous movie had done. Although I guess this movie is also mostly just collecting dust on YouTube, technically. Although it is collecting less dust. Or more dust. Okay, so my metaphor is kind of falling apart, but you get the idea. So I wanted it to look as good as possible. But while I was in the process of decorating, I was struck by an idea. What if the miniature house was just a blank shell at first, with no decorations on the walls and no furniture at the start of the movie, and then gradually over the course of the movie, it slowly came to resemble the large house more and more. This would have the double benefit of making the movie much creepier and giving me additional time to create the new decorations for the miniature house. I think I now understand what they say about the written form of the script being only the first version. Production sees the first rewrite of the script, and editing is the final rewrite of the script. I realized that I didn't have any clue what I was doing on the legal side of things, so I found a copyright attorney online and contacted her. She gave me a lot of really good advice on how to avoid copyright infringements, such as inadvertently showing branded content and trademarks in the background of my movie. I knew that I had a problem, because since I had built my miniature house out of Legos, that meant that every single one of those little bumps on the top layer of bricks had a tiny Lego trademark on it. I could blur it out in post-production, but one thing I've learned is that if there's a way to fix it before you get to post, you're going to be much better off. Blurring that many tiny trademarks in post would be nearly impossible and would take forever, so I needed another solution, and I had an idea. Before starting filming, I took some white paint and painted over the top layer of bricks to conceal the trademarks, essentially blurring them out ahead of time so I didn't have to worry about it later. Also, since this was a physical blur and not a digital one, that meant that it would stay right there on the bricks regardless of what kind of camera motion there was. So I wouldn't have to worry about motion tracking and adjusting the position of the blur effect on every single frame. All in all, this was a much better option. The next problem I had to tackle was that of the LEGO minifigures. In Crowforest 2, I had used LEGO minifigures to represent people walking around the miniature house, but LEGO minifigures are a recognizable trademark, and this time simply painting over them wasn't going to change that. So what I ended up doing was going to Walmart, buying a box of soft wax earplugs, and making my own tiny figures out of the soft wax. The first figure I made ended up being way too big, so I had to try again with less wax, and the second figure ended up being just the right size. But I kept the larger figure because I knew that I would need it for the larger scale model of the miniature house. The miniature house itself is a full and complete set featuring the entirety of the real house, now including the garage and the attic. So that's what I would be using for the majority of the movie, especially any wide shots or zoom-in shots where the full thing would be visible on all or part of the shots. But I knew that I would need a larger, more detailed set for some of the shots, especially the dream sequence, so I needed to build a larger scale model. But unlike the full set, the larger scale model didn't have to be complete. It just needed to include the area of the house that I would be using in that particular sequence. One particular example of the need for a larger scale model was the sequence involving lighting the candles and having them go out. The set piece for this scene is the front hallway altar table, but in the miniature set, the hallway is so tiny that there are absolutely no details on the table. So I had to make a much larger model for that scene, and only show it in close-up so as not to give away the fact that in reality, the set only consisted of 3 walls and a base plate, and was not connected to anything else. The next thing I did was to buy a pair of work gloves and spray paint them white. Once they were dry, I covered the outsides with more of the soft wax earplugs that I had gotten. They ended up looking really cool, and I knew that they would work well in the dream sequence. But I knew that I would need more than just a point-of-view shot looking at wax hands. I would also need a wide shot showing the whole wax figure, so I would need a costume. I went to Party City and bought a black blank face mask and covered it with more of the earplug wax, and it looked really cool. So now I had a mask and gloves, but I still needed the rest of the costume. I thought that perhaps a bunch of layered up clear plastic rain ponchos might work, or possibly bubble wrap wrapped all around the person, but I could figure that out later. The mask and gloves were the main things. The rest would just sort of fall into place later, hopefully. I had initially thought that I needed to make tiny outfits for the figures to wear that would match the outfits of the characters. And in fact, I did make one such outfit for the larger scale clay figure, but I decided that much like with the miniature house having plain bare walls at the start of the movie and then gradually coming to match the decorations of the real house, I needed to do the same thing with the wax figures, with them starting out as just plain wax and then gradually coming to resemble the characters, first with the matching clothes and then finally with faces and hair. I did a test shot of painting a face and adding hair to the wax figure with the matching clothes, and took still pictures of the process against a green background, so that I would be able to replace the background of the stop-motion sequence in post. And the resulting time-lapse transformation of the figure from plain wax to having a horrific face is very creepy. It's somewhat reminiscent of, but I'm sure in no way ripping off, the scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, wherein a faceless clay mannequin is molded by invisible hands to have the face of Freddy Krueger, through use of a similar stop-motion effect. I absolutely love Elm Street 3, and I was excited to do this homage. And if you are interested in seeing my Halloween special from this year, I talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and I even include this test shot of this wax figure transformation in that review, juxtaposed against the shot from Elm Street 3 that I'm describing here. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. Additionally, I had gotten my start in film in the field of stop motion, so I was excited to incorporate some stop motion into my movie, even if it was just a few frames. But I was sure that before I had finished the movie, I would have done a few more sequences of stop motion animation, particularly in the dream sequence, wherein I intended to show the mini wax figure walking around the miniature house set. This would have multiple benefits, including acknowledging my roots in stop motion, allowing for overhead shots that would be impossible in the large house, since I don't own a crane, and even if I did, I can't exactly cut a hole in the roof. And finally, it would reduce the number of shots requiring the full wax figure costume, which I had still not fully worked out yet. So that was 3 good reasons to do it. Plus, stop motion in the dream sequence just feels right somehow, with the movement of the figures being weird and not quite right, perfect for a dream sequence in which everything is weird and not quite right. The next thing I did was to get some panning shots of the inside of the miniature house and edit together a mock-up of the opening credit sequence I wanted for the movie. I used a temp track of myself playing on my sister's keyboard, with a simple chord progression in the bass and a simple 3-note loop in the treble. It sounded pretty good, and certainly creepy, but it was still pretty basic, and I knew that I really wanted the music for this movie to be something special. So I started looking around for a composer. It was my older sister who ultimately put me onto one, so I contacted him and started the process of working together on the movie. I still needed to address the issue of furnishing and decorating the miniature house to match the real house. And so, to that end, I placed a Lego order with the components I would need to build the miniature shelving and furniture, as well as the tiny ladder to go up to the miniature attic. Then I went to Michael's craft store, and I went a little crazy on their miniature aisle, buying more miniature items than I probably should have. I figured I would be able to make use of those items in the movie by buying similar full-sized items and doing either a match cut or a match pan across. Then I went online and found some miniature laundry items on Etsy, including a miniature washer and dryer, and miniature copyright-free detergents and bleach. Before I started filming, I needed to upgrade my camera from what I had been using, so I went to Best Buy and bought a new Canon video camera for about $1,000. And finally, I needed to upgrade my editing software from what I had been using, so I purchased Final Cut Pro for $300. This is going to be an expensive film, at least by my standards.